Hi, and welcome to Soul and Science, a podcast on uniting Western psychology with Eastern wisdom. My name is Jnana, and I am a psychotherapist residing in India and in conversation with Ardas Ji, who is an international trainer in yogic wisdom, and he is from Portugal. We invite you to embark on a profound exploration of the human journey with us. We integrate scientific insights into the mind with Eastern wisdom on life's polarities, paradoxes, and boundless nature to uncover a deeper understanding of our existence. Season 1, we begin with the exploration of relationships and the part that leads back to the self. Why relationships? We are constantly engaging in relationships with everything around us, from people to our environment. While we usually focus on relationships between two people, the most profound relationship we have is with ourselves. How many of us are truly aware of this relationship we have? Do we nurture it, trust, love, and respect it? Or are we living in fear and rejection of self, waiting to be validated externally? So join us as we go deep dive into the relationship with our mind, our body, and our spirit. So thank you so much for joining us, Ardas Ji. And we would like you to introduce yourself, and thank you for being with us here.
Well, hello everyone. So I am Ardas Singh. I am Spanish. I live in Portugal, and I am a yogi. This is going to be interesting because we were thinking about the polarity between the East and the West, and I am a Western guy, but I will be mostly representing Eastern yoga, so yogic wisdom. And Jnana is from India actually, and she is representing psychology, even though Jnana is a trainer, a yoga trainer as well, and I've learned a little bit about psychology. So we both have a little bit of the other, but there's going to be this polarity between both, and hopefully that's going to trigger some interesting conversation around different topics. And yes, we believe relationships are the key that makes us humans. Relationship is very, very important as humans, and there's many facets to that. So thinking about it, we decided to start the whole series on relationships, and the first one would be the mind, because it's the most personal thing that we have with us. So that's the topic for today.
Thank you, Ardas Ji. Most of us, when we talk about relationships, we think about it as in relationship to another. And I was looking back at what relationships really mean, and it was really the connection we have. And it was really interesting for me to have this conversation around the mind and our relationship with the mind. Especially because today, the one thing that I'm noticing most is that most of us are running away from our mind. And so I'm going to begin this just with the question, which is most natural, which is what is the mind? And how does possibly ancient wisdom look at it? Because psychology looks at the mind as this entity that feels things and has emotions, and it has perceptions, the way we see things. And then it has a lot of more in-depth workings, as we will talk about it as we go ahead. But it's probably one of the most fundamental aspects of the human existence. What do you see and understand with the mind when you look at it from that lens of ancient wisdom?
Well, I try to look at it from both perspectives and compare it, and you will give me a more insights into the psychological aspect of it. The way I have been perceiving lately is that we have a different approach from the West and the East. And the way I see is that, by the way, I'm an engineer as well. I studied microelectronics. So many of the maybe the images that I will present, the allegories or the examples that I will give may come from science as well. So I will do a mixture of that. But I feel like there's a difference between looking at it top down or bottom up. And I mean that if you look at it from the West, I feel that psychology is focused in a way that we have a brain, and that brain is like a very advanced machine, and it can produce thoughts. And somehow out of those thoughts arises something called consciousness. And so consciousness is the result of the brain. While from the yogic wisdom is the other way around. We have a consciousness linked to our spirit, and that consciousness comes down into this being, this human being, the body, which has the capacity to sustain these thoughts that are going to be guiding this consciousness in some way. So it's a very different looking at it from the top down. So if I have to look at the mind, and I have to always feel that there is a difference between mind and consciousness. So I would always have to be looking at this difference between the two, even though sometimes we may say the subconscious mind or the conscious mind or the unconscious mind. But then what does that mean? No, and I think when you look at the yoga, there's not this differentiation in this way, because we use different terms. In yoga, you would say that mind is many things, and there is different elements for those concepts, like the part of me that thinks that this is me. That would be my ahankar. That is what we would say kind of like the ego in the West. So that's one part of me, but there's another part is memories, another part in charge of the senses, and so on. So it's difficult to find how to correlate what the terms are in yoga with the terms from Western psychology. But do you agree with this concept of top down and bottom up?
In a sense, we do front to back, back to front, probably in psychology, where we're looking at, like you said, the brain, right? And that we have the old part of the brain, which is pretty much the brain stem. So if we look at it, it talks about the four kinds of mind, where we have the reptilian brain, which is the most ancient part of us, which is about survival and safety. And then we have the midbrain, which is about emotions, or the limbic brain, where we have also the hippocampus and the amygdala. And then these are required to process memory and emotions and keep a set of images that create for us an understanding of what is dangerous. And that's how our whole sort of narrative sort of comes out from. And then we have the front of the brain, which is unique to man and human, which is your prefrontal cortex or your rational mind. And then there's
That's
something,
interesting. Just that, if you let me interrupt 1 second,
yeah.
because it sounds very much like you are describing the chakras.
Mm,
Like when you're talking about the most primitive and ancient and in charge of the survival with the brainstem, and that sounds like the first three chakras. In yoga, we say that we can operate from the different level of each chakra depending. And the first chakras are in charge of that: survival, basic survival, the first chakra. Second one is reproduction. Third one is feeding. Is located in the navel. So it's about nurturing yourself. So that's also part of survival. And then as you go into the fourth, then you come into the reign of emotions, and that would go beyond the amygdala, more into the emotional systems of the brain, I guess. And I can imagine you are carrying on, and then it would probably go higher into the chakras. So
right. And I think that's where we then move to the front instead of the top, possibly. And what I've been reading about is, of course, like you said, that there's a brain, there's a mind, and then within that, um, is a consciousness. Whereas, like you said, it sounds like it's different in ancient wisdom yogic philosophy. And it's interesting because then this rational mind is trying to make sense of all these decisions and all of these things that we are doing on a day-to-day basis that make us uniquely human, and which is very different from animals and their existence of free movement and things like that, not without the structure of the way that we human beings kind of tend to think. How does that
well,
how does
the very word for human, it contains man, which comes from the Sanskrit manas, which is mind. So human is an animal with a mind. So we can agree in that level.
absolutely. Yeah, and then what is this man and mind that in psychology we try to, kind of go back to Freud, who said we have this id, this ego, and we have this super ego. And you mentioned about ahankar kind of being like the ego, and that constitutes the egoic mind, and then there is the subconscious and the unconscious.
So
And
what are the three? Can you explain a little bit these three aspects?
yes, I will. So the id is basically, according to Freud, as he put it down, is where our desires sort of rest, and everything that we don't want to really see kind of goes and rests there. The ego is more.
Would that correspond to subconscious then?
No, it's the subconscious is sort of a different experience. So this is pre-conscious, subconscious, and unconscious, right? So
The ego and the superego are connected to this preconscious, conscious,
this
and subconscious.
conscious, yeah, sub
Okay.
and subconscious, and then unconscious. And that's how he talked about it. That's one, the psychoanalytical approach to that. And since he was the father of sort of psychology and the beginning of all of these conversations around the ego, and then this ego has become this word that everybody uses and we use without fully understanding that this ego is where the I exists. And the fact that I am doing something, the ego is considered the it or the desire. And then there is a super ego, which is this moral police in our mind. Many even look at it as the inner critic, right? That keeps telling us how to be moralistically correct, how to go by society's norms. They're the voices of other people. And that sort of allows man to exist in a certain sort of a structure and a system that allows him to be a part of a larger whole narrative, fitting in, having rules and regulations and all of those sort of things. And then there is a conscious, subconscious, which all of this holds, which is parts of ourselves that we're not fully aware of. And then is the unconscious that holds these beliefs about ourselves, past experiences that actually impact a lot of the way we behave, the way we think, and our perception of reality, so much of which is not known to us. And we keep living in that cycle of subconscious, unconscious beliefs coming up to the surface. They generate thoughts, and that's where we live from. And then thoughts are born. We listen to these thoughts, and these thoughts make us behave in certain ways. And that's really the existence that we're living with when we're looking at it just from a psychological perspective. And in this journey of becoming also a trainer, I realized, oh my God, there's so much more to us than just this definition and structure of mind, ego, id, ego, superego, unconscious, subconscious, and that there is something larger as a consciousness. And so I was wanting you to just shed light on how you or the yogic sciences really explain that to us in more unlimited sort of perspective.
Yes. So yogic science has been evolving, and a lot of it has been now re-understood and reframed with the new understandings of psychology. So I think part of what I'm going to say, it may not be necessarily the classical view, but that's the way we now understand it, having this approach from psychology. Even though at the same time psychology is something very, very new, right? It's 150 years or something, and yoga is like thousands of years. So there's going to be a difference there as well. But the way I hear it right now is that consciousness and mind, they are interlinked, they're intertwined, they are mixed together like this. It's kind of like, how can I find a good analogy? Like a sponge and water, and the sponge is filled with water. So the water is the consciousness, and the sponge is the mind, let's say. So the mind is trapping all the consciousness within it, and the consciousness is going deeper into the mind, and it finds different layers of that. And when we speak about it, we also utilize those terms like, we don't use pre-conscious. I'm wondering about the connection to the way I understand it, but we can say that there is different levels of consciousness, and we say that there is a semi-conscious. That is the state of being awake but distracted. Let's say you are in your mind creating fantasies. You're driving the car, but you are writing an email in your head. You are not fully conscious. You are not fully aware because you are in somewhere else, but you are not asleep because you're driving a car. So we call that semi-conscious, or kind of a hypnotic state.
Mm-hmm.
And then below that, we have the subconscious, which I think that correlates exactly to what you are saying. There is impressions from the day to day, and then they stay there, and then every now and then they surface to the semi-conscious, and thoughts come up, and we operate from those things that are stored in the subconscious. Then deeper than the subconscious, there's the unconscious, which is the deepest level of the mind that we are not aware of. And there could be things there that are trapped. Maybe, for example, some deep psychological trauma could get stuck. It's not even subconscious. It goes deep, deep to the unconscious level. And that generally doesn't affect us, but every now and then something will come out of that. Like if we have an abyss, like in the deep part of the sea, when you look at the bottom of the sea and there is a deep abyss, like going very deep, and there's these monsters with a light trying to attract the prey. So we would say that kind of monsters are that live in the deepest of the unconscious, but not only monsters. There's also jewels there, like some sunk ship that contain a treasure, right? All these gold coins are there. So there's something very precious in the unconscious. So those are the three lower levels, yeah, from the semi-conscious down. And then from the semi-conscious up, there is consciousness. So when you are driving but not thinking about something else, and you're fully awake, and I'm aware, and I'm seeing what everything is around me, that's pure consciousness. And that's the one that we want to cultivate in yoga. That whatever you are doing, be conscious of what you are doing. Don't be distracted in something else. Don't be creating a fantasy, but be conscious of what you're doing. So generally, fantasies go in two directions. One, you think about the past, and then you rehearse what happened, and then you try to rewrite your history. And I would have said this, if next time I should do that. So you're rewriting the past and imagining and projecting towards the future. So you are missing the present. So a lot about yoga, like breathing, for example, and being aware of the breath, is about bringing ourselves back to the conscious and staying in the conscious. And then if you sustain the conscious state of awareness very deeply, then you can get into this altered state that we call super conscious, which is something higher. And that's I don't know if that's even contemplated from psychology, but how that's the perspective. But I wanted to ask you one thing as well. The way you describe the ego is it helps us to stay within the structure of society, and it monitors us so that we are behaving accordingly to the rules. That sounds like a positive aspect as well. So in modern psychology, do you see the ego as something to cultivate, something to destroy, or something completely different? What would be our approach to ego? What should we do with the ego?
So we really look at it as a healthy ego or a not healthy ego. And that whether we are able to understand the role of the ego and its relationship to the desire, as well as balancing the expectations or norms of society, for example. And that when the ego is not healthy, what are the implications of that? And that's where I think a lot of our psychological work goes in, when that is not in a healthy state,
Right.
when it's causing us any kind of suffering or the inability to accept change, or that, things like that, that we then get stuck in, like you said, maybe a narrative that has been created due to past experiences, and I'm not able to then manage or navigate these two aspects in a more integrated way. And then there is, of course, the whole aspect of integration. And if, for example, there has been trauma, then how does our mind get stuck in a loop and a pattern of operating from the same story and over again? And how, like you rightly said, when you're in your semi-conscious, you start looking at what you could have done and project it onto the future and create that. And then we get stuck in those internal narratives a lot. And that's what creates a lot of suffering and a lot of the pain that we see in human existence today. And psychology, I mean, sitting in front of the whole idea is to take away and see, where has this come from? What is it really doing for you in the ego today? Is it trapped in a narrative and a story and a belief system that is not allowing us to navigate that balance? So it's about a healthy and an unhealthy sort of ego dynamic that we really look at, because ego's job is to action what we want to create in this world. However, is it holding me back? Is it become overloaded? What is it overloaded with? Too many defenses, for example, because human beings, we need safety, security, and survival. And if any of those were unmet early or in childhood, as psychology sees, then we have more of that overload of filters and perceptions and beliefs that actually get in the way of us living in, for what you said, fully conscious. Right? And the whole idea of therapy is to bring you back from those narratives into the fully conscious. And therefore, I think a lot of what we look at Safe Space, or I have through my own journey of healing trauma, is how we can bring those two understandings together. Because there is a relationship also between mind and body, right?
Right.
And that we understand that a lot of these imprints, while we think they are in the mind, they actually stay in the body.
Yes, they are communicated. Body, mind, spirit is all connected. And sometimes a good way to work on the trauma or whatever has happened in the mind is to work it through the body. So
Mhm.
there will be trigger points in the body which are there to help you release these subconscious blockages or traumas that we have stored, and that's going to bring a lot of healing. And that sounds strange because doing something like this, like pulling my arms apart and stretching, this is going to put pressure between the shoulder blades, and that's about a trigger point where if we had a memory of being betrayed, it got stored over there. And we have, some people say it's like a knife in my back, like somebody was, putting a knife in my back. And that's literally the feeling that you get because that's the point that gets blocked.
Mhm.
Trust is something that happens in the heart, what we say the heart chakra, but it can go in the front, it can go in the back. So when somebody behind your back betrays your trust, it gets stored there. So if somebody was betrayed, let's say your partner went with somebody else, and then you find out, and then that gets a trauma that anytime you want to approach another potential partner, you have this memory of fear that you're going to be betrayed. Then this kind of exercise, it's just a one little example, yeah. But this kind of exercise from yoga, they are not telling us, but this is what it's doing, is helping to put pressure on these points and is releasing that trauma. So yeah, body, mind, and spirit would be connected in that way. Let me go back to the ego. You said a few things very interesting, and I would like to kind of reflect upon them a little bit,
Mhm.
because we are like animals. We talked about this, and we have been designed for hundreds of thousands of years. Our brain has been designed as an animal, and we have been humans very little compared to how long have we been animals. And even from the time that we have been humans, and I'm talking about the brain, we were designed to survive, like you are saying, right? But now we don't live in situations where we need to survive most of the time. Few people actually live in a war, and then you have to actually apply your skills to just basically keep yourself alive. And anytime we are not in a survival situation, those mechanisms are still there. And the problem is when they trigger in an inappropriate way. So in order to survive, we would group in tribes, because to survive alone in the wild would be almost impossible. So those genes of those who would group into tribes would be useful. Now, tribe is a group of people who are similar, and they share some beliefs and they share some goals. Like, let's all, grow this rice and save the seeds for next year. And that means that we have to be similar enough. So we are trained from little, from when we are young, to think in a particular way so that we fit the model of this group of people. And that's healthy, yeah. And that would be a healthy side of the ego, that we can operate within the rules of my tribe. But tribes were designed to be around 30 to 50 people. And now what we see in the recent decades, but especially in the recent years, with the explosion of online world and online living, our tribe has become millions of people, because we are connected through these online communities, and social media and you write something and millions of people can watch it and they can reply to you and they can send comments to you. So when it's only 30 to 50 people, it's relatively easy to say something that is everybody's going to agree with you. But now you have a lot of dissenting opinions, and we have a number of mechanisms in us that is going to make us feel inappropriate if people are going to say, that's not good, what you are saying. So on one side, having exposed ourselves to a wider world is making us more insecure. And social media is going to be triggering your insecurity. Then you start changing who you are to try to get the more positive likes as you can. So you are going farther and farther away from your truth. We will talk more about truth and our true essence, but that's the objective of yoga, to find who we are, self-knowledge, no? Self-realization. So the more we are trying to cater for the others, we are going farther away. Now, that's on the survival aspect, and that's how the ego can be a problem for us from a yogic perspective. But then there's also the other side. There's one is survive, the other is thrive. We don't
Mhm.
live in, most of the time, we don't live in moments when we have to, battle lions. We how can we thrive? And to thrive, we can, to me, it's kind of the opposite of staying in your comfort zone. If you want to grow and become bigger and better in what you do, you have to expand yourself and expand yourself out of where you are comfortable. Yoga is a lot about expanding yourself, even from the physical, but also with the mind. Now, when we expand ourselves out of the comfort zone, that means meeting people who are different from us.
Mhm.
So actually, what I just said that was negative, being exposed to a wider world, suddenly becomes a good thing, because as we are exposed to more people who think differently from us, I have the opportunity to grow into that. If I don't see them like the enemy and I try to prove that my point is right, which is there's a lot of YouTube videos on that, no? I'm demonstrating everyone that I am right about what I'm saying. But can I meet that different culture? Can I meet that different essence? Because that's also a human being. Even if the culture is different, the essence is also the same. So by meeting somebody with a very different culture, and I can still find something in common, the thing that is in common in most, in all these different cultures will be the most common essence within all of us. So we have a yin and a yang, a positive and a negative, no? What we say
Yeah.
in yoga, a karma and a dharma of having expanded our communities so big.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's interesting what you point out about the ego and about being in a tribe versus meeting different, and looking at it at what might get in the way of surviving and thriving. And that's a lot of the work that we do with trauma, which is to say that what happens when there is trauma, that everything then becomes fearful, everyone then becomes an enemy. And then how am I able to really look at releasing all of those beliefs and fears that I have developed within the psyche to able to receive another in the same essence? And that,
Exactly, because you were saying before about getting trapped in a particular kind of thought, like
yes,
this recurring thought. And because we don't have lions very often, we are not facing lions, but when the thought is this coming out of this trauma, it can make me believe that I am in front of a lion. So I am constantly in this amygdala triggered, and then I am in this fear situation. And so I'm not thriving, I'm just surviving, no? And that's why it can be so hard.
yeah. And that's where I'm going to bring in just a little bit of my own journey as well
Yeah.
to express this, is that I was in survival mode for most part of my experience, having received undergone different forms of trauma. And trauma I'm just going to share here is not just a single event, like example, an earthquake, or um, a single event. It could be exposure to a long term situation that impacts the ability of a person to receive safety or feel, for example, that they have no escape. This could be something like living with abuse, domestic violence, addiction in the family, mental illness, uh, uh, long term, any form of neglect, emotional neglect or physical neglect, and abuse, sexual, emotional, or physical abuse. And being exposed to a dangerous, unsafe environment for an extended period of time further affects just our mind's ability to cope with, we get almost stuck in survival mode in some experience, and that we get wired to see the other as unsafe in some ways, and it just gets into the body as unsafety. And it was difficult to move from survival to, to coping, to regulation, to thriving. And
What
apart
would
from
you say? What would you say was the key aspect that helped you to initiate the transformation from one to the other?
so definitely the journey and recognizing that something is terribly wrong in why I felt so fearful all the time. And I couldn't understand that there was anxiety around everything that needed to be done. Everything seemed overwhelming. Everything seemed out of my control. There was a lot of negative chatter, and I just couldn't get out of bed and face the world and face what show up. And that's when, of course, the journey from initially medication, beginning with then therapy, and then from there, it took me into this world of the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, compassionate inquiry, understanding trauma, what was happening to me, both in the body and the mind. And then, of course, the yogic world that allowed me to bring in, uh, postures and meditation and mantra to allow me to recognize that I was not this trauma narrative that I had created for myself, whether it was I'm not good enough or I'm broken and I can't be fixed. And that you get into that cycle of trying to fix yourself. And I was like, suddenly there was somebody who told me that I have a consciousness, an observer, a true essence in me that wasn't this trauma person, and that I needed to work to strengthen that, to help the parts of me that were struggling to get a semblance of safety again. And it wasn't a single thing, I think, that helped. It was adhering to my mind, body, soul. All three of them had to somehow be contacted and connected with to come back into some form of integration with each other and start speaking to each other. For me to say,
Mm.
okay, I can feel safe in this body, because otherwise I didn't have any experience of just how to get a control over my emotions or what fears I had, which trauma work sort of helped me understand where that came from.
That certainly seems very reasonable, right? And even logical. If we have a body, we have emotions, we have mind, and some people will accept or not that we have a spirit. And we know for sure that they are connected because the way you breathe affects the way you think and the way your body moves. And the way you hold your body, your posture is going to affect your thinking, and the way you think is going to affect your posture. So there's very clear ways to know they are all connected. So finding healing in a way will imply some sort of wholeness, finding wholeness and finding balance and harmony between all these different layers. So only going into the mind and just approaching it from one angle. Okay, let's deal with the mind, focusing completely only on the mind, ignoring what's happening with the body, ignoring diet, ignoring emotions, ignoring, well, emotions sometimes they're included, like the psycho-emotional self, but also ignoring the spirit from the yogic perspective. It's not going to bring full feeling of satisfaction and well-being. It's going to be dealing with the mind, and you can spend dealing with the mind decades in psychotherapy, just going over and over with the same story. So let me ask you one thing. I know you treat a lot of people who have gone through tremendous trauma, sometimes really hard trauma. And in your practice, I can imagine that on one side, the one who has gone through trauma and they are still trapped in that mentality, they are just looking at the past in a way, what happened, and they are dealing with that. And we want them to move on and to face the future and to be present for what is coming for the future. And but we don't want to do that ignoring that they feel that. So we want them to recognize that, yes, okay, it's a, we want to accept what they have, right? To feel accepted, to feel that yes, even my pain is accepted. I don't have to reject that. But how do you know when you are crossing the line from, okay, let's accept everything that happened, into, with one of your clients or patients, when they are ready to, let's focus fully forward and let's start looking forward now? Do you have any clues or tips on how to do that transition, to not be too much caught up in healing therapy, because there's also addiction to therapy. Many people are like therapy, and I think it's gone quite wrong as well in modern times. It's oversensitive. Yeah, anything you can say, I've been harmed and I've been traumatized by what you said. Oh, come on, it's just words, right? And sometimes we get too extreme with things. So how do you know when to move on from looking at the past to find some sort of healing towards, let's get you ready to face the future?
Um, I don't think it's a linear process, or I don't think we go from here to here. A lot of the journey of trauma healing is largely to do with not just the event, but what you made it mean about yourself. And that when you go into that experience, you have a new perspective of what actually happened from where you are today in your consciousness and understanding. And that you look at not only processing the hurt and the pain, which is necessary, because that's how human beings are created. Something that is ingested needs to be also excreted and put out, and that's the same with energy, right? All these energies, which are emotions, energy in motion, get stuck then in the body, and that requires its own expression. And when there is an expression of that, and there is space for that expression, automatically there is a sort of an alchemy of what did I make that mean about me? And that is a narrative. And then you look at that narrative and you see it different. When the narrative is already changed, does that really mean that I am not good enough or that it's my fault? And it's layers, and it doesn't happen in a single session, which is why sometimes it takes as many, because it's peeling away the layers of these stories and narratives that we have built over time. There is a new, in that moment itself, there is a transition that has occurred. So it's not that you get here and then you go there. And it's happening in the same moment,
But the
really.
key is the change of narrative.
Yes, the key is a change of perspective of what happened, and therefore what I made that mean about me, and therefore a difference in the way I'm seeing myself, that I'm not these things that I believed that I was. Um, and the way that we do is also today, the world of psychology talks about the true self. It talks about the essence and the observer, and involving the observer in the process of introducing compassion into the conversation, of what I might see it as today, which would be different from when I had experienced it. And we make these narratives from what we understand is to make sense of what happened.
Yeah,
And
but which sense do you make out of it? That's the
sorry.
key. That the key is, which sense do you make out of it?
Right. And it
Because
also depends on when did it happen. If it was a child, the natural experience is I must have done something.
yeah,
And that's where it begins. And then the foundation of those beliefs and narratives later on are also a part of, the 7 stages of psychological development, and the ego control over the I, because if I do, then I can change it. And also gives you a sense of I could have done something differently about it, until you grow up and you realize the difference between my behaviors and responses and reaction versus somebody else, which creates the process of psychological development of differentiation, individuation, and allows you to look at it in a different way. And so the big part is also what I might see and look back at the same thing at 21 in my psychological development may be very different when I see it at 30, because I've also grown in my psychological development in that time. I'm going through the different stages of that development that allow me to have that sense. And then, of course, if you're adding in the concept of the true self, of the essence, then I'm also not so attached to the ego's definition of me being this or that. I'm able to create an observation between, okay, a part of me believes I am this or that, but I'm also this, and the ability to hold both those experiences of self within the same conversation. And that happens, I think, as an ongoing process, not from moving from A to B, but it happens together. And which
Right.
is yoga really helped me strengthen that. So I was just wondering if you could share how the essence and the true self looks like in ancient wisdom, and how that is strengthened through that journey. Sorry, if there was anything else you wanted to share before
No, no,
that.
no. I'm just thinking now, um, uh, from what you mentioned before, no, that there was a change in the narrative to the way you talk at yourself about what happened. That's the relationship to words, which is what we're going to be exploring next week. We're going to be talking about that, which is how do I speak about myself and about what happened to myself. That's the change in the narrative. That's interesting. But certainly, well, if we look at philosophy, all the philosophies of the world ask the same question. Basically, if we reduce it to one question: is who am I? Who am
Mhm.
I really? And the difference with yoga and all the other Western philosophies is that the posing of this question, preparing this question, is not about an intellectual exercise. In yoga, this who am I is an experience. It's an exploring the experience of my identity. Now, we the main problem we see in yoga is that we identify with this side that we call the ego. In yoga, we will call it ahamkar. Yeah, ahankar. And ahankar means kar is creating or doing, and aham means I am. So the part of us that makes me think that I am. So we will say that that's a false sense of ego, a false sense of self. Sorry, false sense of self. So ego is like this part of me that tells me I am this person who has been traumatized and has been through all these pains and this suffering. And we associate our identity to those things that happen to us. But from the perspective of yoga, again, coming from the top down, we are a spirit that has come into this life. We are having all these experiences in life, but that's not me. There's a deeper essence of me who is going through these experiences, but that's not me. And what I say to myself about these experiences, that's not me. And when we hear the words that our mind projects, the problem from the perspective of yoga is that we believe that we are those words. So when the mind is speaking and it speaks in first person, we believe that we are that, the one who is speaking that. And we are not that. The mind is an instrument and it can produce this very realistic fantasy that this is who we are. And it's so real, apparently, that we get entranced by it. This is the hypnosis. And our consciousness again goes into the sponge. No? So we get trapped into this, what this mind is projecting. And the mind has all sorts of things. It can be beautiful, it can be horrible, and it can be traumatic, but it can also be like, oh, I'm powerful and strong, and come on, I'm going to conquer the world. So the mind can have both sides, and we believe we are that dialogue, that speech that is going on within our heads. So when we ask ourselves, who am I, in the yogic perspective, is to explore who you are beyond those words, beyond those thoughts, beyond those memories of those experiences, and to find the true essence that is behind all that. And that true essence lies in consciousness. We are a consciousness, we exist, and this is linked to the spirit. In some ways, if you want, some people have resistance to speaking about the spirit. So if you want, anytime I say spirit, you can translate as consciousness, and that's fine. We can talk like that. And when we are doing this, in a way, we are taking weight away from all these experiences that are painful and that have caused some sort of suffering in us. So, okay, I am this consciousness. I'm having this human experience. In this lifetime, I'm having these experiences which are more or less traumatic or more or less peaceful or maybe very beautiful as well. All of the whole range of human experience. But even all this range, that's not me. So, from the yogic perspective, it would be not to have an intellectual discussion, I am the consciousness. It's not that. It's about letting the mind understand enough so that the mind can surrender to the process of going back to consciousness and separate the water from the sponge and then realize that you are that water. And the sponge one day falls away. So if we look at us from the moment we are born to the moment we die, there is the first stage of life is a lot about the body, the development of the body, and children are very physical, yeah, a lot of energy. And then there is a moment when the body starts to slow down and fall down, and we can see that in football players or other sports people whose performance starts to they peak and they go down. And when the performance of the body starts to go down, the performance of the mind is still climbing. The capacity of the mind to you understand things much better, the brain is more cohesive, the thought, I think until 25, maybe you will correct me, you are the psychologist, but the brain is not fully integrated, right, until something like 25. So the mind carries on, but the mind has also a peak and then starts to go down, and then we start losing memory, we don't remember people's names, we start, and the perception of the senses, we lose part of the sense of smell or the hearing or the eyesight. So, well, some of this is the body, some of them is the mind, yeah, but these both are happening at the same time. So the body is going down, the mind climbs up, then the mind comes down, and that's when the spirit climbs up. So in if we can um, cover the lacks of our body with the mind, that's great. But as we feel that the mind has also lacks, has some lacks, some deficiencies, yeah, the shortcomings of the mind are appearing, then is when we can latch on more strongly to the spirit. And that's the spirit that can take us forth. So it's not about an intellectual exploration of who am I, but is allowing myself to separate from this sponge that is dying and stay in this ocean of consciousness, no, this water, and realize that that's something deeper, that essence of that we exist, and to have moments. That's why we meditate. To have moments when all the thoughts calm down, and you are just there, and you are not those thoughts, and it's so clear, and it's an experience. It's not an intellectual understanding. So that's the objective.
Thank you. I know you and I have been having this lovely conversation, but I think we have people who are watching, and if there are questions, we invite you to please share them so that we can take them on and into this conversation and interaction to be part of the co-creation of this podcast. So if there are questions, please do share them. We are happy to sort of take them on board as we go. But Ardashji, the mind, and there's this consciousness, and you said there is a separation from the I am, this ahankar. How else does, I know that in our learning there was the buddhi mind and different kinds of mind that get we talked about. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes. So without trying to get, I will try not to get too technical or too complex. Um, there is a lot of garbage accumulated in the what we would say the subconscious, that maybe doesn't coincide with your term for the subconscious, but let's call it like that. There's a lot of garbage accumulated in that aspect of the mind, and that's linked to our memory, and that's linked to the things that are going to be influencing my behavior, and particularly how I react to things that happen, and also how I perceive things, because my perception is also disturbed by my past experiences. So all those things, yeah, all those things from yoga, we need to clean it up. We need to work and go and clean it up. And that's the brain has a very, very poor way to do that, which is dreaming. That's the only way that the brain really can by itself go and clean itself up. when we are at night and we go to dreams, in the dreams we project some of these fantasies of whatever happened, trying to find some peace with it and clean it up. But generally, it's not very efficient, and that's where if you have been, if we have been, and we have all been accumulating garbage, right, throughout the years, then that's where meditation comes in. So that's one aspect of the mind, that part of the mind that is accumulating all that. Meditation, we need meditation for that. And if there is some trauma, we do recommend you have to go to a psychologist, right? Because we say body, emotions, mind, spirit is all connected. But if you have a problem with the body, go to an osteopath, right? Or go, you have something in the mind, go to a psychologist, because that's the professional who is going to help you, and is going to be helping you, but while you keep that practice of yoga, no? So, okay, meditation is to clean that aspect of the mind. The other aspect of the mind is the ego, that ahankar that thinks that it's doing things. Ahankar, I translated it in one way. Another way of translating is ahankar, I am doing, so I am the doer. So thinking that all the merit and all the credit for what I do in my life is for me because I am great and I'm doing it, right? That's the ego who feels superior. But then, if you take credit, you also take blame. So that's the one, oh, I'm guilty, I'm not good enough, I'm doing everything wrong. So that's the ego that is pushing you down. Both sides of the ego are linked to what we like and what we dislike, and this internal criticism and judgment. So the other side of yoga is about mental yoga, yeah, mind gyan yoga, and it's about observing what's happening within the mind. So part of the meditation is about sitting with the eyes closed. Yes, okay, that's part of meditation. But part of meditation is to be during the day in that state in which you are awake. And when a thought tries to bring you, we said, to the past to recreate the past experience, or to the future to try to imagine what's going to come and project a fantasy, to observe the thought and evaluate, is that something that is me or not? Is that part of my essence? And is that useful or not? And if it's not useful, I'm going to let it go. Now, in the end of the day, we don't want to eliminate the whole ego. We just want to eliminate the useless part of it, the self-criticism that puts you down, or the feeling so exalted you think you are greater than everybody else. So these are the things that we want to neutralize, because we will still feel, yeah, I am. I still feel that I am. So we want to keep that feeling of identity. And let's face it, we live in a society, we live in a family, we live in a community. So we want to be able to operate. We don't want somebody who is completely wild and they just do whatever they want, who doesn't care about what the others will think. That's not very healthy attitude, right? And it's not going to be very successful. You're not going to be very successful in life doing that. So yes, being able to see the rules of the world and play the game without being part of the world, let's say. So I'm not part of the world, but without, let's say, being a slave to, what these rules imply. So part of this mind yoga, this Gyan yoga, would be to observe when these mind games arise and neutralize them there. And then the other part of the mind, that is the buddhi mind, that's the mind that discerns and discriminates and is connected to intuition as well. That is the part that we need to awaken, and that's linked to very much to consciousness. So the more we awaken that part of the mind, to that, the more we are separating this water from the sponge, let's say, the more we are in a conscious position to make conscious choices rather than reacting to the world from our past experiences. How
Yeah,
does this
so
correlate to you? How does it go?
so I think similar in the sense that we are beginning to recognize that there is a discernment, intuitive power within us that observes what's happening instead of becoming what is happening. And then there is a choice of how I choose to respond. But that separation needs to occur. And that over the years, what I've been seeing myself is that psychology and yogic philosophy, meditation, mantras, breath, all allow the discernment, the buddhi mind in this case, or consciousness, as we are also using our true self or essence to become stronger. or I don't know if we use the word awaken, but we say to become stronger, to become aware that there is a part of us in this intuition, which most of us kind of look away. And also the more the trauma experience, the less we trust that ourselves and our inner voice, and then we can't discern between the intuition and the mind. In the chatter in the mind, and somehow that intuition gets lost, and to sort of soften the voices of the mind to allow the intuition to speak louder. And that somehow bringing that together just strengthens that process so much more, because you're connecting back to this body and the consciousness that rests within. And that really helped me with yoga significantly in strengthening that aspect of the discernment, which otherwise we almost get enmeshed in the stories, in the emotions, in the inner chatter. We get attached to it and we start living from that, and almost afraid of our own mind, which is where we began, that we're running away from our own mind. And then our mind is no longer there to serve us, but we kind of become afraid of our own mind, which is
Yeah,
what.
I think that's why a lot of us go into social media, right? To distract ourselves because we cannot hold the silence.
Yeah,
The challenge for many people is when you sit down and you close your eyes and you have 10 minutes to meditate, let's say, then you have nothing else but your mind. And
yeah,
then that could be really confronting to hear the mind as it's what is speaking. But at the same time, if you ignore it, it's gonna get worse, right? If this is like under the house, there is another level and there is a trap door, and you open it for a moment and there is like a lot of insects, and you close it. No, 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 nothing will come up into the house. But then that's growing if you let it be. So at some point you meditate, it's like you open and then there's no insects anymore. Now there's monsters there, right? So how long are we willing to let it go? That's gonna get even worse. So, but I can understand how difficult it can be just to close your eyes, just be in silence and let the whole garbage come out, play out. Now, the key is if you can remain neutral and not react. So if this garbage is coming out and you remain neutral, you're not having this whole emotional reaction to it, but you're observing it and letting it go because, okay, all right, well, that happened.
mhm.
And they said that to me. That was nasty. And I did what? Oh, I did that. Well, that wasn't a good reaction. Okay, fine. Why do I see it? Can I just let it go? It already happened. I cannot change anything. So can I just let it go? And in that letting it go, it relieves some of the pressure. It's like a pressure cooker in a way. Relieves some of the pressure, and then next day it becomes a bit softer and a bit easier.
Yeah, because that's, I think, our biggest fear of staying with ourselves now, and what may show up that I cannot necessarily confront because we're so afraid of possibly our own judgment. And that how can you stay neutral is what you said, to just observe. And how does.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Because it's even beyond being neutral because the mind judges. We cannot stop that. That's part of what it does. Can we apply the mind in a way that it can judge in the highest possible way? And that's even, yeah, it's neutrality, but it's even more because you are saying, you know what? I had to go through that.
Mm,
That's radical acceptance, right? To be able to fully accept, take responsibility for what is yours, not take on what is not yours, let go, being able to let go what is not yours. What you were saying, with a child experiences something, they think it's them, so they take it upon themselves. So now as adults, look back, realize that was not mine. I can let it go. But you know what? I had to go through that experience so that I can learn what I had to learn to be where I am right now. And if you like where you are right now, then that's easier to do than when you don't like where you are. But if we don't accept what's happened to us, that's an inner battle. Then we are
yeah,
fighting with ourselves. And that doesn't have generally a positive outcome. So we are fighting against what happened to us. And that's what makes us stay in that loop again and again and again and again and rehearsing and rehearsing. Well, letting it go requires in some way, you know what? It's fine. It's fine. And if you have to meet some judgment to say that, it's fine. This is, it's fine. Whatever happened, it's fine. Why do? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's important because that's the journey to come to from and having the ability to create that separation from the I am to this observer using tools of psychology and ancient wisdom, yoga, meditation, mantra, breath, to stay with what shows up in the presence of compassion or a compassion neutral observer who can observe that and allow that charge to release without making that mean something about me. And that separation that I've seen both psychology and using yogic um, practice can actually strengthen that a lot more. Can you I'm very excited, like interested in knowing how that really happens from a yogic lens. How does this buddhi mind, or how do we strengthen that? What is actually happening in the process?
In what? In the strengthening of the Buddhi mind?
Mhm. In that, when you said the separation and meditation does that, and then there is the whole yogic practice, how does that allow for that separation to occur when you're, with the practice?
The
What,
separation between what and what? Sorry.
sorry?
The separation between what and what? You mean
The,
the,
the I am and the discernment. Right? When that separation occurs through meditation, when you're learning to observe more neutrally, just as the thoughts pass by without necessarily getting attached to it or making meaning something about. And how does the
right.
whole yogic practice enable that to happen and strength? Because I know it's happened for me and a lot of other people that I've seen without fully understanding how that may be the case.
Well, I don't know. Well, I'm not sure how to explain. I don't even know what happens, but basically, it's like a layers, like different layers. You will start. You can start by having this discernment whether I'm the body or not. So if I lose a finger, do I stop being myself? No, I'm myself without a finger. If I lost a hand, I would still be myself without a hand. If I lost an arm, and hopefully not, but I would still be myself without an arm. You decide then, well, then I'm not my arm, and the same happens with the whole body. So you go through this process of discerning what is you and what is not you. Uh, Now, am I my emotions? Well, an emotion comes and emotion goes. When I stop being angry, have I stopped being myself? No, even if a person is very often angry and they feel very comfortable in their anger, that's the way they generally express themselves. They, at some point, the anger goes away. Have they stopped existing? No. So you are not your emotions. All right. Then what are you? Thoughts. That seems closer, right? But then, well, I don't know about thoughts. Let's explore the thoughts. And so when you start learning how to meditate, and one of the first exercises that you learn is how to you are, rather than trying to stop the mind, you say to the mind, okay, go talk to me. I'm gonna listen to you right now. And when you say that, you don't say that with words, but with your intention, yeah, your will. Okay, go. And then the mind suddenly is like, what? Now he wants to listen to me. Like doesn't know what to say. So there is a moment of silence, and then he will produce some thoughts. And then you're listening to the thoughts. Okay, I hear the thoughts, they go away. Now anything that appears and disappears, anything that comes and goes, that's not true. But if one form of definition would be, true is the thing that was, that is, and will continue being. So if my body can come and go, that's not me. If I can lose a finger, that's not me. If I can, my emotions come and go, that's not me. That's not truth. That's not my true essence. That's not who I truly am. So the mind is working like that. The mind sometimes comes, the mind sometimes goes. And when you start to observe the mind, just applying your consciousness, it's already, is like, I think it's what called Heisenberg cut. what's it called? Like one of these effects that when you apply your consciousness to something, you are altering the effects of the experiment. Let's say when you're observing something, you change the experiment. So the moment you're observing the mind, suddenly the content of the mind changes. And when you are actually asking the mind, go talk to me, I'm going to listen to you, then somehow the mind stops because the mind is trying to help you. The mind is a tool. And the moment that you pay attention to the mind is just kind of loses itself a little bit. But that requires a strong effort of concentration and attention and consciousness to focus it. Now, when you do that, this intertwining of the mind and the consciousness then does like this. And then from the consciousness, you can observe the mind. And then you realize that actually the mind, it's also like this. And it's the mind and the ego. So there's the mind and the ego and consciousness, they are kind of like
Mm.
this. So the moment that you you are stop and you say, okay, let's go mind. I'm listening to you now. And then you hear the mind. The fact that you're already hearing the mind or seeing the mind, that means that the mind is outside you. Who is the you? The one who is observing the mind. So I'm not the mind because I'm observing the mind. And that essence, that's the one that awakens. And that's the you discern. That's not me. And then when it's outside, it's easier to see, you know what? This is mine and this is ego. And then you can separate. And then you can identify which things from the ego are useful and which are not. And then when it becomes like this, then I can utilize it as a tool. And then you can be conscious, you can be awake in life, but you can utilize the mind as a tool for your purpose rather than becoming an impediment and an obstacle. I don't know if it answers your question about Buddhi, but
It does because it really wants it's so because we look at mind as just this one thing that we don't have any control over. Most of us think that. And we take the thoughts to be truth instead of
right.
just and we get attached to that, which brings me to the conversation of truth.
And we identify with them.
And we identify with them, and that becomes truth. And then that becomes the whole conversation versus I am right and you are right. And then
Right.
the thing that you mentioned earlier that you see that I need to be right comes from the fact that I'm attached to the thought. And I think the thought is truth and reality,
And the
right?
more we talk to different people from different cultures, we realize that what we say is not truth, that there is something deeper.
Absolutely correct. And that kind of brings us into the depths of then, if this is not the truth, what is reality? And that how this, we are both the observer and the thinker, but then there is a separation in that. And then I'm making choice, and then free will comes in. I'm no longer just a slave to my thoughts. I today have the choice to engage or not disengage. Suddenly I'm able to look at you as another human being with a different opinion from, and it's just an opinion, and I'm not attached to the opinion. And we're able to
Yeah,
create.
opinions. That's very important. Yeah, because
Yeah.
recognize my own opinions, the opinions from the other, and neither of them are truth. Yeah, and there
Yes.
is such a thing as truth. It's just not opinions. Opinions are just opinions.
Exactly. And therefore, the question of really what is truth? And you said we will talk about it in just a second earlier on. So I was going to come to what is the yogic perspective on truth? And
Are
you
we
said,
not doing a whole episode on truth? I
yeah,
think we do. We are.
yes, I thought to kind of connect it back to this whole question of, people look at fact as truth and the thought as truth and things like that, that just to kind of put that together, that therefore then truth is different from opinion, perception, thought, likes and dislikes, right?
Yeah. I think that's
Uh,
fundamental to recognize my opinion is not the truth. And
yes.
I can think that this is correct or this is incorrect, but that's my thoughts. And there is such a thing as a truth. The same thing as there is such a thing as a universal morality, let's say. But then your personal morality, a lot of it may have to do with your culture. And for some other cultures, it may be right or maybe wrong. Some things may be common and you can find them in any culture, in any religion, some universal elements like ahimsa, like not damaging others. There is some essential elements of morality that are seem to be true universally for everybody, and we can all agree rape is wrong. We can all see that, right? And we all can relate in the same way. No matter how you paint the image, that's wrong. So there's something universally that we will feel that there is something immoral about that, let's say. While other things are more my opinion, your opinion. Therefore, if I think that, and my thought, my opinion will change throughout the years as I mature, then that's not true. One of the what I suggested as a definition for true is that which was, which is, and will be. So if my opinion changes, then that's not truth. There has to be something else. We will explore this more in depth, I think, the concept of truth. But it's good to start because today is about the mind. So it's good that as we are exploring the mind, we realize that most of what the mind is saying is not truth. Sometimes the mind will contemplate the truth, but most of the time it's just producing thoughts and ideas and it's trying to help, but it's not, the metaphor of the Bhagavad Gita, which is, in the story of the Bhagavad Gita, you have these horses with the reins, and then Krishna is holding the reins. Now, most of us, we don't hold the reins. Like you were saying, it's difficult to control the mind. Well, it's difficult because we never learned, because nobody trained us. In a school, I mean, public educational systems are pretty bad in most countries, and they certainly don't teach children how to think, even less how to act, emotionally be stable, or how to whatever. We will talk about different aspects as well about childhood and how to educate our children. I think that will be good for the podcast as well, because you are a specialist on children. That's your main specialty, so I think
Actually, children are not as much my specialty.
not so much now. Okay, I thought it was more. Okay. But in any case, we have to recognize that we never learn. That's why it's hard. But this metaphor of holding the reins, to be able to hold the reins of the mind, that's critical. And that takes time, that takes effort, that takes discipline. Not everybody wants to invest the time, but if you do it, then imagine one of the most intimate parts of yourself. It's not yourself, but next to yourself, your mind. If you conquer that part of you and you are able to hold the reins and direct it in the way that you want, rather than going always to the past, to the trauma or whatever, to direct it, that instrument can be wonderful. In yoga, we don't want to kill the mind. We don't even want to kill the ego. It's about training the mind, cleaning the mind, directing the mind, and awaken your consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that psychology and ancient wisdom again do, is to clean the mind, and the mind use the mind as a tool to navigate and create what it is that you want to, instead of the other way around. And while psychotherapy is one way of doing it, what would you say? Meditation is one way of working with the mind. Are there other ways that you recommend, Ardasji, in
Yes,
how clean the mind and sort of get ourselves? Because that's, I think, where we're all sort of would, like to be at.
I'm sure there is plenty of ways, and everybody has their own. Sometimes it's about giving a rest to the mind as well, being able to enjoy free time and not always be doing something in life. So rest periods are important, but also just come out of the mind. We are so much time in the mind. It's a surprise that it's not like a melon. So do more things with the body, paying attention more to the body, to the breath, and then there's of course little tricks that everybody will have. Maybe for somebody will be walking in the forest, another one will be gardening, with the roses and floral arrangements, or painting or writing something. Everybody has their own form of meditation, let's say, and that's healthy to find also what is our own natural form of meditation. But the approach would be, try to find the harmony between all the levels: body, emotions, mind, and spirit. And if you have an issue with one of the aspects, then you may need a professional on that aspect. Like, if there is a problem with the mind, go to a psychologist and deal with that in parallel to keeping your effort in finding the harmony with all the other aspects as well. I'm going to
Yeah,
an osteopath regularly, so it helps me with my alignment with the body, and that's going to help me with my mind as well. So it's all connected.
yeah. And in that connection, brings me back to the whole point of being connected and therefore brings me present to the current moment. So I'm wholly there in consciousness and not living from where we began, the semi conscious state where I'm, living in the past, but sitting in the present and trying to make sense of whatever is happening, but be wholly present, having switched off the past mind. And that's being wholly conscious. And that's when you're fully living and thriving. Would that be,
Yes,
yeah?
definitely. Yeah, I think there is a lot of effort from the West as well to go into that. They call it mindfulness, right? There's a lot about that. I'm not sure about the term mindfulness. I mean, full of mind. That's what we want. I'm not sure. I would say more consciousnessfulness. I don't know if you can say that, but I think that's recognized as a positive exercise and effort to put into being more mindful, to be more present, to be more here. No matter what, if you are more present, you're also going to be able to see better the opportunities that present to you. Many people complain about their life, but sometimes we don't see the opportunities that arise that we could be better and do better, and that's because we are trapped in our with these things from our mind that is looking at the past, imagining the future, and then you don't see the present. So this concept of being aware in the present, that would be fundamental. Yeah.
Yeah. And that really is interesting for me about how that will change the quality of the relationships with everything else that we have. Because we do struggle with relationships and other things of being fully present and right and wrong and who's right and who's wrong. And so many of those things begin to sort of slowly not exist even or become less in our awareness when we're able to create that separation and discernment and choice in response with the mind. To almost live from a more meditative state. That meditation is not always closing your eyes and going into Gyan Mudra and bringing your awareness to your breath. It could be done in so many different ways, like you rightly said. But in general, to have that really authentic and honest and intimate relationship with the mind.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. and
yeah,
and and that will change the way we communicate with the others. No, that what's coming next in the next week, it comes right out of that. No, you were talking about different relationships, that how we relate to other people, and that's our communication, that's our words. It's gonna come straight from what we were conversing today. So I think that's a good connection to what's coming next week.
absolutely. I think with that, we are in a good place, Ardasji, to
Yes.
bring awareness to the beauty of this conversation and what all the knowledge and all the learnings that were shared between us. And just thanking everyone who's joined, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, Ardasji, for joining. We'll see you. We're here every Friday, 5:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Ardasji, what time is that for you in Portugal?
In Portugal, this is we start at 1. Central European time is 1. So, but
Yeah,
thank you, Niana, very much for organizing these events and the podcast, and the team that is supporting you in creating this podcast, and everybody for watching. And if you watch and you enjoy this, you can be here present next week at the same time, and you can write in the chat and present questions to us so we can interact with you as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
thank you very much.